Two public service announcements before I preach the homily. There's a wonderful man, his name is Lance, and I won't say his last name, but he left me this product on my front drive to remove rust. And he wrote me a little note. He didn't put any phone number, he didn't put an email on there. And I looked him up in our parish data system, can't find him. Looked him up using a service that I pay for, can't find him. Looked him up trying to find him on Facebook, can't find him. So I don't know if he's here, Lance. If you're here or you're live streaming, would you please give me your phone number or email, because that product is unbelievable. Unbelievable. I got a Polaris, that one that we got from my friend. It's got a lot of rust on it, and it's like, I need a lot of that stuff. And the second one, a little more serious. When we receive communion, a reminder, if we receive on the hand, a reminder that we consume right there and then in front of the minister. We don't walk off with the host. When you walk off with the host, I chase you. And it's not pretty. I've never had to tackle anybody, but I will. I will. We don't walk off with the host. We consume then and there. No walking off. No walking off. If you want to take a slight step to the right and stop, that's okay. But no walking off. All right. We have arrived at Trinity Sunday. And what can we say about the Trinity? It's often referred to as the preacher's nightmare. And what do we say? What can we say with our limited vision and our limited intellects? You know, one time Augustine was walking along the beach, and he had been formulating this document called De Trinitatis. And he's trying to get his mind around the Trinity. He's walking on the beach, and he sees a boy digging in the sand. And he digs a hole in the sand, and then he goes over to the ocean, and he grabs some water and dumps it into the hole. And he does it again, and Augustine's like, what are you trying to do? He says, I'm trying to fill this hole with the ocean. And Augustine says, you're never going to fit the ocean in that hole. And the boy says, neither are you going to fit the Trinity in your mind. Nonetheless, as human beings that ponder and reflect, we think about our God and what it means to be Trinity. And there's no other religion in the world, not Judaism, not Islam, is there a Trinitarian concept of God, Father, Son, and Spirit. Remember, we're trying to fill that hole with the ocean. No matter what we say, we're trying to fill that hole with the ocean, that little hole in the beach. Augustine had a psychological image of the Trinity that came to him. The dynamics of the mind, he believed, mirror the Trinity. Now, this is beautiful about human beings. I don't think a deer walks around saying, why did I do that? You know, I don't know why I did that, but I really love myself. I don't think a deer does that, but humans do. Humans do. Let me dig in a little deeper. There's this mirror of the Trinity, albeit imperfect, and all analogies break down, but it's there nonetheless imprinted in the human being. The mind in the Latin would be the mens, would be an image of the Father. The reflecting on self, notitia sui in Latin, is knowledge of self, would be an image of the Son. And love of self, amor sui in the Latin, would be an image of the Spirit. One mind subsists in three relations. And that's the only distinction in the Trinity, is the relations. God is not Father, or God is Father, but the Father is not the Son. Let me back up. God is Father, Son, and Spirit. The Father is not the Son is not the Father, the Spirit is not the Father and the Son. But they have this relationship, this communion of love. And in the mind, we think about self. First, we have the mind, this self, the intellect. We think about the self. We do this all the time. Saint Paul does this in the 7th chapter of Romans. We do this all the time. Why do I do the evil that I hate, but I don't do the good that I want? We reflect on this all the time. Why did I cut that guy off in traffic? I'm a better guy. Why did I do that? Sometimes we're in what's called halt, hungry, angry, lonely, and tired. When we're in halt, we're apt to do silly things. When you're in halt, pull in the reins and pray, eat, rest, whatever you need to do to get out of halt. But we reflect on the self. And hopefully this leads to love of self. And I'm going to get to that because it's really hard in this culture, in this time, in this age. All of this, right, is a reflection of what goes on in the Trinity, this relation. One, God, and there's this 3 relations. Now this breaks down because we could call it modality. And God, that's modalism in God, that God doesn't appear as Father one day and as Son is another day and Spirit as another day. No, there's 3 distinct persons. But this is what's going on in the human mind as a mirror of what happens in God. God is one, but God subsists in a play of relationships. Again, we say, what was I thinking? At the same time, we are the subject and the object of the same question. This is from Bishop Barron, which comes from Augustine. And through the course of life, I believe, through the course of life, as we reflect upon the self, I think love of self should bubble up. And it's very hard, and I'm going to get to that. Love of self, it bubbles up. And the Father reflects on the Son, Son reflects on the Father, and the love of the two is like the breathing forth of the Father and the Son. It's another person. You come to self through maybe spiritual direction, through the course of life, understanding who we are as human beings, trying to follow the will of God, maybe through counseling or some other healing method, we come to love ourselves more thoroughly. We are made in the image, the imago Trinitatis. We are made in the image and likeness of God, unlike anything else on this planet or probably the universe. Love of self is difficult, and now I'm going to move into that. Why? Oftentimes, there is a father wound. A father wound. So many of us have it. I have it. I live with it every day. It gets better as I come to know Jesus, as I work on my issues, but it's still tough. Love of self. We have a father wound. I want to share the lyrics of a song that came out mid to late 80s, Mike and the Mechanics, The Living Years. If you get a chance, just go to YouTube and type that in, The Living Years, Mike and the Mechanics. This speaks of the father wound so profoundly, and so profoundly that I can't match the inflections or emote what the singer sings in this song. Every generation blames the one before, and all of their frustrations come beating on your door. I know that I'm a prisoner to all my father held so dear. I know that I am a hostage to all his hopes and fears. I wish I could have told him in the living years. Oh, crumpled bits of paper filled with imperfect thought, stilted conversations. I'm afraid that's all we got. You say you just don't see it. He says it's perfect sense. You just can't get agreement in this present tense. We all talk a different language, talking in defense. And then the refrain, say it loud, say it clear. You can listen as well as you hear. It's too late when we die to admit we don't see eye to eye. So we open up a quarrel between the present and the past. We only sacrifice the future. It's the bitterness that lasts. So don't yield to the fortunes you sometimes see as fate. You may have a new perspective on a different day. If you don't give up and don't give in, you just may be okay. So say it loud, say it clear. You can listen as well as you hear, because it's too late when we die to admit we don't see eye to eye. I wasn't there that morning when my father passed away. I didn't get to tell him all the things I had to say. I think I caught his spirit later that same year. I'm sure I heard his echo in my baby's newborn tears. I just wish I could have told him in the living years. And then the refrain, say it loud, say it clear. You can listen as well as you hear. It's too late when we die to admit we don't see eye to eye. We have this wounded image or this wounding from our Father, and we bring that into our adult life, and it affects so much of what we do. And then we carry that to God the Father, and that's what I want to speak about today, because in the second reading we hear Abba. We hear Paul say Abba, which is a repeat of what Jesus said about the Father, Abba, which is kind of like not father, but daddy, kind of like daddy. We have this broken image oftentimes of the Father in the Trinity. I want to replace that, or encourage you to replace that, if that's the case, with a better image of the Father. Father Oliver died right at a year ago. He died on this solemnity, the Holy Trinity, the most Holy Trinity. Can I give him to you as a replacement image for the Father? See, we have a Jesus-looking God. When people say to Jesus, Philip says to Jesus, show us the Father. And Jesus says, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. All the gentleness, the forgiveness, the kindness, the peace, it resides in me, it resides in the Father. If you go to St. Anne and go into the Adoration Chapel, years ago an iconographer painted an image of God the Father, and they had to write that on there because it looks like Jesus. And in the Eastern tradition, it's not very common that you see icons that include God the Father. Father Oliver is a replacement image. Remember him? Kindness. I mean, he was always so happy to see everybody. I would go knock on his door and say, hey, Father, I need to go to confession. He was so happy to receive me. When I'd be, because he had room in his garage, I was storing things over there. So I'd punch the code and open the door, and he'd come walking out. And he always had a smile and a kind word to say. He'd hobble across Pennington, and he said, when you cross Pennington, you got to say an act of contrition, because you don't know if you're going to make it. Think of him in the confessional. Remember that? Did you go to confession to him? You sit in there and you just felt so listened to. I am sitting in the presence of a Father, and maybe he's a reflection of the Father. So kind, so patient. He would often tell you when you struggled, now consecrate this to the Blessed Virgin Mary, and you will see things get better. Consecrate these people that you're having trouble with to the Blessed Virgin Mary, and you will see things get better. And he was right. He had an incredibly good speaking voice, and he was always so patient, kind. He loved to celebrate the sacred liturgy. He loved the sacred liturgy, and he loved people. He was what's called an OMI priest, Order of Mary Immaculate, and he worked in Canada. He was a pastor up there. He gave spiritual direction. He was always on the phone. He couldn't stand the internet, but he was always on the phone with people, spiritual counsel, spiritual direction, and he was very political, very political. Sometimes we'd have to hear, well, he's saying this too much and that too much, and it's like, don't tell me, tell him. If you got the courage to go and tell him, tell him. And like the Father, gently moving us to the Son, gently moving us to the Son. Friends, when you have trouble with God the Father, maybe your own lyrics would be like those of this song. Switch it out. Think of Father Oliver and then go to the Father. Go to the Father. When we do this, we will begin to properly love ourselves, amor sui. We will properly love ourselves, and we will be able to call God the Father, Abba.